millionaire man pretends to be in a coma, but is shocked when he hears a secret from his nurse. Arthur seemed to have been born under a lucky star. He was rich, influential, the owner of powerful companies, with real estate scattered across Brazil and a collection of luxury cars that left any enthusiast drooling. Even professional drivers would turn their heads at the sight of his garage. At 45, he was the picture of success. But one ordinary night, everything turned upside down. It was a Friday, just past 11 at night, and he was heading home from the office, something he occasionally did to clear his mind. Alone at the wheel, he was driving his favorite gem, a sleek imported car, shiny black, brand new, with tinted windows. No music on the radio, just the roar of the engine and the silence of the city. The streets were empty, and the road he was on led straight to the luxury condo where he lived. The expressway was deserted, the sky clear, everything calm. Until fate decided to play a cruel trick. Arthur barely had time to register what happened. He only remembered a bright light, high beams exploding into his eyes. He tried to turn his face, but it was too late. Suddenly, a car appeared out of nowhere and slammed into the side of his vehicle, as if it had calculated the exact moment to strike. The impact was harsh and violent. His car spun out and smashed directly into the guardrail. The airbag exploded like a bomb. The windshield shattered into shards and the headlights went black. Inside the car, only the sound of creaking metal and his heavy, labored breathing could be heard. Blood ran down his forehead, and his body was pinned, crushed between the seat and the steering wheel. He tried to move, but his arms wouldn't respond. His vision blurred, the world spinning. And just before everything went dark, one last image formed in his mind. Clara. She'd been acting strange lately, cold, distant, like she was living another life somewhere else. He tried to ignore it, to believe it was just a phase. But it gnawed at him, and it was her he thought of before the world faded away. Minutes later, a rideshare driver passing by saw the wrecked car and pulled over. He didn't hesitate, called for help immediately. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 ambulances and a police car arrived. Rescuers had to cut through the side of the vehicle to get Arthur out. He was unconscious, with multiple fractures, his face covered in blood, but he was still breathing. There was still a spark of life in him. At the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. The doctors and nurses knew exactly who was on that gurney. It didn't take long for the news to hit the internet. Millionaire suffers serious accident. By morning, headlines were everywhere. Reporters swarmed the hospital entrance. Helicopters hovered above the building. His name became the talk of the entire city, but behind the fame and flashing lights, the situation was dire. The crash had caused severe head trauma, the diagnosis, medically induced coma, and now time became the enemy. Clara arrived at the hospital like a shattered soul. She cried uncontrollably, screamed that she couldn't lose her husband. She collapsed on the corridor floor, begging for answers, clinging to doctors like they were angels. Everyone was moved by her suffering, but no one imagined that behind that display of grief, something darker lurked. Clara wasn't quite the devoted wife she appeared to be. There were secrets, and maybe, just maybe, the crash wasn't just a tragic accident. Meanwhile, Arthur was rushed to the ICU. It was a grim scene. Tubes everywhere, machines blinking, monitors beeping every second. A place suspended between life and death. The doctors exchanged uncertain glances. No one knew how long he'd be like that. Could be hours, maybe days, weeks, even months. But the harshest truth was this: no one could say for sure if he would ever come back. His brain had suffered deeply. The trauma ran deep. On the outside, he looked like he was sleeping, but inside, it was like a storm had torn everything apart. The ICU room was always the same. Dim lights, heavy silence, and a cold that sank into your bones. Nurses came and went, repeating the same procedures, the same routine, every day. That's when Gabriela entered the story, a newly hired nurse, discreet, quiet, but with sharp eyes. She was assigned to care for Arthur during the night shifts, those hours when the hospital was calmer, emptier, almost ghostly. Gabriella didn't know the full story. She only knew that this powerful man was lying there still, locked in a silent battle against death. But something about that room felt off. The silence wasn't just from the hospital. There was a strange weight in the air, and every time Clara showed up, Gabriella noticed. The wife's smile didn't match her eyes. Her lips said love, but her gaze screamed distance, coldness, maybe even contempt. That detail stuck in Gabriella's mind. Arthur, on the other hand, saw none of this. Trapped in a body that wouldn't move, it was like floating in a dark place, timeless, formless, a limbo. He felt no pain, but no peace either. It was like being locked inside himself, unable to scream. Only his heart kept beating. His soul hadn't given up yet. And it was exactly then that his story truly began to change. That crash. It wasn't just a random accident, it was something bigger, something staged. But Arthur would only find that out much later. Clara arrived at the hospital like someone stepping out of a nightmare, dressed in black, tight-fitting clothes, smudged makeup, tear-filled eyes, or at least they looked that way. She ran inside, calling out her husband's name like her world was collapsing. She cried loudly, hugged anyone nearby, spoke with doctors, nurses, even the security guards at reception. Said she had to see Arthur, that she couldn't live without him, that they still had a whole life to build together. Everyone was moved, young, beautiful, desperate. She looked like someone straight out of a soap opera. The attending doctor, touched by her despair, allowed her to go in for a few minutes. Clara walked slowly to the room, small steps as if walking on broken glass. When she entered, she approached the bed, held his hand, and started crying again. "Baby, stay with me. Please, you can't leave me now," she whispered with a broken voice. But once she was alone in the room, everything changed. The crying stopped. Her eyes opened slowly, fixed on his motionless face. Clara ran her hand through his hair with a fake gesture of affection. Then very softly into his ear, she whispered, "It's time to rest, my love. Stop fighting." Then she walked out like nothing had happened, wiped her face, fixed her hair in the hallway mirror, and put the mask of the grieving widow back on. She spent hours in the waiting room, red-eyed, phone hidden in her hand, which she never let go of. She looked like she was waiting for someone, or some news. The next morning, there she was again. She arrived early, a huge purse over her shoulder and a thermos of coffee in hand. Said she'd stay by her husband's side all day, and she did. She went in and out of the room non-stop, asked about the exams, wanted to know about the meds, talked to the doctors like she was carrying the weight of the world. Everyone admired that dedication. They thought it was love, but what no one imagined was that behind every gesture, every tear, every sweet word, there was another reason. Gabriella, the nurse of the silent nights, began noticing things no one else saw. Tiny details, subtle gestures, expressions that didn't match the grief Clara displayed to the world. When people were around, Clara wept like her heart was in pieces. But the moment she thought she was alone or unnoticed, her face changed. Her look turned dry, hard, almost cruel. It was like she wore a mask and took it off when she believed the stage was empty. Gabriella wasn't one to judge, but she had a sharp instinct. And with Clara, something just didn't add up. She started noticing that sometimes, when Clara was alone in Arthur's hospital room, she would lean in close and whisper things in his ear. Things that didn't match the role of the devoted wife she pretended to be. Phrases like, "You thought you were so smart, but you fell like a fool." Gabriella acted like she didn't hear a thing, kept doing her work as if nothing was happening. But inside, a knot kept growing in her stomach. It was that gut feeling that's hard to put into words. Pure instinct. And Gabriella's instinct was screaming, "Something is very wrong here." Over time, Clara started trying to control everything. She decided which doctors could treat Arthur, demanded test reports, and even changed the visiting hours. She claimed it was for her husband's well-being, to ensure he got the best care possible, but Gabriella knew better. Clara wanted to keep everything under control. No gaps, no questions, no room for anyone to discover what they shouldn't. Outside the hospital, Clara led a completely different life. At the luxury condo where she lived, the tears turned into discreet smiles. The nights, which should have been spent in mourning or prayer, were filled with low-key parties, private dinners, and long phone calls with someone named Vinicius, a name no one in Arthur's family had ever heard before. Her phone never rang out loud, always on silent, always hidden, like someone with something to hide. The house staff started whispering among themselves. It didn't seem normal. Clara looked lighter, as if the accident had been some sort of relief. She didn't lock herself in a room, didn't cry over old photos, didn't sit for hours in silence, as you'd expect from a woman who almost lost her husband. Quite the opposite. She laughed on the phone, ordered expensive wines, booked beauty appointments, and shopped online as if life was not only back to normal, but finally beginning. But back at the hospital, she played a different part. She brought flowers, posted pictures of her hand holding Arthur's with emotional captions on social media. "Still waiting for you, my love." Her followers were moved, flooding the comments with prayers and messages of support. Thousands of likes, thousands of heartfelt words. But behind the flawless performance, nothing was real. She had the ICU room remodeled, changed the curtains, brought in lavender diffusers, installed a TV on the wall as if Arthur could watch anything. She even brought a framed photo of them smiling on a past vacation, all to reinforce the image of the devoted wife who wouldn't give up. But as time went by, her visits grew less frequent. Clara no longer spent much time by his bedside. She preferred to sit in the hallway, glued to her phone. Then she started asking more and more often about disconnecting the machines. She claimed she didn't want to see her husband suffer, that this wasn't a life worth living. But sometimes things slipped out, odd, poorly disguised phrases. "Doctor, do you really think he might wake up? Wouldn't it be better to let him rest in peace?" These questions didn't just come once. And with each new attempt, Gabriella grew more unsettled. The nurse could feel it, in every fiber of her being, that Clara wasn't hoping for recovery. She wanted the end, and fast. Until one ordinary afternoon, Clara walked into Arthur's room, thinking she was alone. She stood by the bed for a few minutes, phone pressed to her ear. And then, as if wrapping up a call, she said something that flipped everything upside down. "Don't worry, baby, he's not waking up." Gabriella, who had pretended to be out of the room, heard everything, and in that instant, she knew. She couldn't stay silent any longer. Gabriella was in the hallway, reviewing charts when she heard it. A phrase whispered, but clear as a gunshot in silence. Her body froze. Her heart pounded, and for a moment she couldn't breathe, trying to be sure of what she had just heard. Clara's voice was soft, but carried something disturbing. Not fear, not sorrow. It was cold certainty, almost calculated. That night, Gabriella couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, tossing and turning, repeating those words in her mind, trying to find another explanation. Was Clara just venting? Could she have been talking about someone else? Or was it exactly what it sounded like? A whispered secret from someone with guilt in her eyes and a plan in her hands. The problem was, no one suspected a thing. The doctors stayed focused on the treatment. Arthur's friends, full of sympathy, praised Clara's devotion, and Clara's followers on the internet practically idolized her. But Gabriella knew. She knew that behind all the theater, there was something dark. And now, she carried the burden of knowing too much. She had to make a choice, stay silent or take action. Clara, on the other hand, seemed more nervous with each passing day. She clung to her phone like it was a part of her body. It never rang out loud, always on silent, always hidden. When she answered, her voice changed, became soft, sweet, almost childlike. It was a tone Arthur had never heard, even before the coma. A tone reserved for only one person, Vinicius. Vinicius, a name no one knew. Not her family, not Arthur's friends. He didn't appear on her social media, didn't go to the same places. But in their secret conversations, it was clear. He meant more to Clara than her husband ever did. They spoke constantly, in the car, the bathroom, the hospital, the mansion. It was an intense relationship, full of promises, demands, and secrets. Vinicius was younger, about 10 years Clara's junior, handsome, athletic, tattooed, and dangerously charming. He claimed to be a businessman, but had no store, no office, no schedule. He rented his place, changed cars like clothes, and lived surrounded by luxury. But the money wasn't his, at least, not all of it. They met years before the accident, at one of Arthur's company events. He worked for a third-party audio-visual company. It was a brief encounter, just a look, a smile, but it left a mark. After that, Clara found excuses to see him again. And Vinicius, being clever, quickly realized the kind of opportunity he had. At first, it was just an affair, an escape, but it soon became a game. Clara wanted more. She wanted out of the routine. She wanted freedom, and more than anything, she wanted someone to pull her out of the life she had once chosen, but now couldn't stand. Vinicius offered that, and she paid the price. Literally. She covered his rent, gave him expensive gifts, paid his credit cards. In return, he gave her attention, affection, and a plan. The first to suggest getting rid of Arthur was Vinicius. On a tense night, after a fight between the couple, Clara showed up at the apartment crying, said she couldn't take it anymore. That's when Vinicius dropped the bomb. What if he just wasn't around anymore? Clara thought it was a joke, laughed nervously. But he wasn't laughing. He brought it up again the next day, and again after that, until they both started considering it seriously. It wouldn't be direct, nothing violent. The plan was to make it look like an accident, a tragic event, with no one to blame. And that's exactly what happened. Months later, a mysterious car on an empty road, forcing Arthur to the edge of death. They thought that would be the end, but fate didn't cooperate. Arthur survived, in a coma, trapped between life and death, but alive. When Clara told Vinicius, he lost it. What do you mean he's still alive? You said it would be quick. She tried to calm him down, saying the doctors gave him very slim chances. It was just a matter of time. But Vinicius didn't want to wait. He started pushing, demanded a solution. He was scared everything would fall apart, and it was on one of those nights that Gabriella heard it again. She was on her way to the hospital pharmacy to pick up some medication when she saw Clara leaning against the emergency stairwell, talking on the phone. Her voice was low, but agitated, and then came the phrase, short, sharp, impossible to forget. Don't worry, love. He's not going to wake up anymore. In that moment, Gabriella was certain. Clara wasn't just a desperate wife, she was part of something much bigger, something dangerous. And now Gabriella couldn't pretend she didn't know anymore. Gabriella had no idea who was on the other end of the line, but it was obvious. Clara was talking to someone she trusted. Her hushed voice, the intimate tone, the pauses like she was waiting for a reply. That wasn't just a casual call, it was a whisper of complicity. Gabriella, still frozen by what she had just heard, walked silently back down the hallway. She stopped at the nurse's station, took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts. Should she tell someone? But who would believe her? It was just a sentence said in the dark, with no names, no context, no concrete evidence. What if she had misunderstood everything? Meanwhile, on the other side of the story, Vinicius was running out of patience. The messages Clara received no longer had the same loving tone as before. Now they were filled with demands, impatience, even veiled threats. He wanted it all over, fast. He sent voice notes demanding she do something, stop stalling. He wasn't going to wait forever. He was terrified Arthur might wake up at any moment and ruin everything. The silence of a man in a coma was safe, but one wrong breath could bring the whole house of cards down. Clara tried to keep up appearances, pretended to be in control, but she was clearly shaken. The plan that once felt tight-knit now felt like a noose. Vinicius pressured her to convince the doctors to turn off the machines, urging her to use emotional arguments, talk about mercy, about ending suffering. But Clara trembled at the thought. She knew it wasn't that simple. There was Arthur's family, lawyers, journalists, and worse, she had no idea who else might be watching, because now, unknowingly, someone was already on her trail. Gabriella. Ever since she'd heard that phrase, "Don't worry, love, he's not going to wake up anymore," Gabriella hadn't been the same. Those words became a stone in her mind. No matter what she was doing, administering meds, changing dressings, reviewing charts, Clara's voice echoed as a disturbing reminder that something wasn't right. And it wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. It was almost a certainty. She tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself she was overreacting, that maybe Clara was just venting. But the more she watched, the more she saw. The sadness that only appeared when someone was looking, the rehearsed affection, the lines that sounded like they were written by a screenwriter. Everything about Clara felt like a performance, and Gabriella, who had seen a lot in that ICU, had never felt her stomach turn quite like that. That night, she got home in silence, dropped her bag on the couch, took off her shoes, and sat at the edge of the bed. She didn't turn on the TV. She just sat there, staring at the floor, like she was looking for an escape. Her husband, Felipe, noticed right away that something was wrong. Did something happen at the hospital? Gabriella hesitated. The question hit hard, but she couldn't put into words the weight of it all. She gave a vague answer, avoiding eye contact. Sort of? What do you mean, sort of? She said nothing. The urge to tell him was strong, but the doubt was stronger. This wasn't a simple suspicion. It wasn't a dosage mistake or a misfiled chart. It was serious, heavy, almost unbelievable. What if it was all in her head? What if she had misunderstood? Just in case, she decided to keep it to herself. For now, neither her husband nor anyone at the hospital needed to know yet. But the next day, she arrived well before her shift started. She had a plan. She wanted to be in the hallway when Clara arrived. She wanted to observe, without being seen. She wanted to see what was behind all that theater. And at 3 p.m. sharp, like clockwork, Clara showed up, stepping out of a black car, heels clicking on the floor, new dress, light makeup, and the same grieving wife expression she wore every day. She walked past reception, flashing polite smiles, like someone carrying grief with grace. She held a bag with a juice, a magazine, a little sweater, details carefully chosen to reinforce her image as a devoted woman. But Gabriella, hidden behind a column, saw what others didn't. She saw Clara's eyes change when she thought no one was watching. She barely looked at her husband's room. She was more interested in her phone, checking it every 2 seconds, anxious, like she was waiting for an urgent message. And when she entered the room, the first thing she did was lock the door. That was absurd. Almost no one locked the ICU door, especially with an unconscious patient. But Clara did it without a second thought. Gabriella felt her stomach churn again. Something was seriously wrong, and now she knew it without a shadow of a doubt. Gabriella waited a few seconds outside. Then she knocked on the door with some made-up excuse. She needed to check the IV line, change the drip, do some routine procedure. Clara took a while to open it. When she finally did, her face was tense, a bit pale. But within seconds, she covered it up with a forced smile, as if everything were fine. The nurse walked in with her clipboard, pretending everything was normal. She checked the equipment, jotted down data, made a few minor adjustments, but what she really wanted was to observe, to see if anything was out of place. Clara's phone was on the bedside table face down, unusual for someone who never let go of it, not even to use the bathroom. It was as if the device were an extension of her body. As Gabriella adjusted the infusion pump, she heard Clara murmur softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "If he wakes up, I'm screwed." That was it. A random phrase, spoken like someone lifting a weight off their chest. But for Gabriella, it was enough. This wasn't just imagination. It wasn't an overreaction. This was real. Something very wrong was happening. During her break, Gabriella locked herself in the staff room, her heart racing, hands sweating. She picked up her phone and called a nurse friend who worked at another hospital, someone she trusted. "Hey, listen, if you heard the wife of a coma patient say he's not going to wake up, and it sounded like she was counting on that, what would you do?" There was silence on the other end of the line. "I'd call the attending doctor or hospital management." "That's serious, Gabby. But what if I'm reading it wrong? What if she's just desperate?" Her friend took a deep breath. "And what if you're right? And it's something bigger? Could you sleep at night knowing you did nothing?" That question echoed in Gabriella's mind. She knew the answer. No, she wouldn't be able to sleep until she did something. But she couldn't go around making accusations without proof, without certainty. She had to act smart. She had to see more, hear more, connect the dots. And so it began. Discreetly, Gabriella started changing the visiting schedules, staying around longer. Every time Clara arrived, she found a way to be in the hallway at the nurse's station, somewhere she could observe. She took notes on everything, glances, gestures, conversations. She was piecing together a puzzle made of invisible fragments. One afternoon, Clara answered her phone in the corridor and walked away to the hospital's side balcony. She thought she was alone, but didn't know that Gabriella, near the linen room folding sheets, had her phone in her pocket, with the recorder on. "The doctor said he's still stable, no deterioration," Clara said in an irritated, impatient tone. "But relax, he's the same. Motionless, zero reaction." Pause. "I already told you I'll take care of it. But I'm not doing this alone, Vinicius. That's not what we agreed on." The name hit like a rock. Vinicius, the lover's name. Gabriella felt a chill run down her spine. That was the proof she needed. Clara didn't want Artur to wake up. She wanted him to never open his eyes again. And worse, she wasn't alone in this plan. That night, sleep didn't come, but it wasn't doubt that shook her anymore. It was fear. Fear of what came next. Because now she knew. She knew everything, and had no idea what to do with the weight of it. The heart monitor beeped with that steady mechanical sound, like a clock that didn't tell time, just marked it. Tick, tock, beat by beat. Artur was the same. Lying in the ICU bed, eyes closed, face swollen, tubes everywhere. He looked completely disconnected from the world, but something inside him began to stir, as if a part of him was swimming back to the surface, trying to breathe again. Gabriella had been caring for him for weeks. She'd come in, do the procedures, gently clean his face, adjust the machines. She was the only one who treated him with any humanity. To the others, Artur was just another comatose body. But to her, he was more than that. He was someone who needed protection, someone in danger. That night, the hospital felt strange. It was a holiday, less movement, fewer people in the halls. Clara didn't show up. The staff was reduced. Gabriella, though exhausted, made sure to pass by his room constantly. Around 2 in the morning, she entered again. Low lights, absolute silence. She went to check his blood pressure, then stopped. She felt it, a subtle movement, gentle, in his arm. She repeated the gesture, another twitch, this time in his fingers. She stared at Artur's hand, like she was witnessing the impossible. She rushed to his eyes, picked up the penlight, turned it on, aimed it. The pupil reacted. For the first time, her breath caught. She stood still for a few seconds, trying to understand, trying to believe. Artur moved his head, slowly, like someone coming out of a bad dream. His mouth parted slightly, lips trembling. His breathing changed. It was deeper, more conscious. He was coming back. He was waking up. "Artur," Gabriella called softly, barely a whisper. "Can you hear me?" He didn't speak, but his eyes opened, slowly, heavily, bloodshot, but they opened and looked at her with confusion, with fear, like someone coming back to life without knowing why. Gabriella gripped his hand firmly, emotional, eyes brimming with tears. "You're okay. You're safe. I'm here." He blinked, tried to speak, but couldn't. His throat was dry, forgotten how to be used. Gabriella moistened a gauze pad and gently dabbed it on his lips. Don't worry. You don't have to talk now. Just know that you're alive, and I'm going to take care of you. Arthur closed his eyes again, but this time it wasn't a coma. It was exhaustion. His mind, finally, was functioning. He was present, conscious. Each thought was a step out of the darkness where he had been for so long. Gabriella left the room with her heart racing. She could run to the doctor's lounge, alert the team, call everyone. Anyone else would have, but she didn't. She sat on the bench in the hallway, took a deep breath, and Clara's phrase hit her again like a slap. If he wakes up, I'm screwed. In that moment, everything made sense. If Clara found out Arthur was awake, she'd snap, or worse, try to finish what she had started. It wasn't the time to reveal anything. Arthur needed time, explanations. He needed to understand what was going on around him, and she needed to tell him the right way, carefully, cautiously. It was a huge risk, but it had to be done. The next day, Arthur opened his eyes again. Unlike the night before, there was more clarity in his gaze now. He stared at Gabriella for a few seconds, slowly moved his fingers, and forced his throat to push out a sound, hoarse, fragile. Where am I? Gabriella came closer, relief spreading across her face. You're in the hospital. You were in an accident, Arthur. You've been in a coma for several weeks. He looked around, eyes wandering like he was searching for a memory, a clue. Gabriella kept her voice calm. I'm Gabriella. I'm a nurse. I've been taking care of you since you got here. Arthur blinked slowly, taking it all in, little by little. After a moment, he tried moving his lips again. Clara. Gabriella paused, sat on the edge of the bed. Her expression hardened slightly. Arthur, there's something I need to tell you. But, it's heavy. And I don't know how you're going to take it. He just looked at her, eyes steady. That was enough. Tell me, his eyes said. She took a deep breath. I heard your wife. I saw her visits here. And she's not here because she cares. She's here waiting for you not to come back. She wants you dead, Arthur. His eyes widened slightly. It was hard to tell if it was shock, anger, or a blow of reality. Maybe all of it at once. He tried to speak, but his throat failed. Gabriella continued. She's with another man, Vinicius. I heard a call. She said you weren't going to wake up, that everything was under control. I swear on everything, I'm not making this up. Arthur remained silent. Then he closed his eyes. But it wasn't sleep. It was pain. The pain of realizing the pieces now fit. Deep down, some part of him already knew. Clara had changed. The coldness, the distance, the empty stare. Now it made sense, and it hurt. I need to think, he murmured with effort. Gabriella nodded, understanding. That's okay, but listen to me. Don't tell anyone you're awake, especially not her. Not yet. You need time to recover, to understand everything. I'm here with you. I'll protect you. Arthur looked into her eyes. For the first time since regaining consciousness, he trusted someone. He felt it, and he held her hand tightly, as if sealing a pact. Gabriella squeezed his hand back. From now on, we're in this together. The first hours of lucidity were torture. Arthur lay there, motionless, staring at the white ceiling. His head throbbed like it was exploding from the inside. His body felt like dead weight. His throat burned, like it was filled with sand. But he didn't ask for anything. He just breathed and thought. Gabriella's words echoed in his mind. She wants you dead, and that name, Vinicius. He'd never heard it before, but now it stuck to everything like a poisonous shadow. Gabriella entered the room silently, several times a day, always with the same calm expression. But inside, she was on constant alert. Every gesture seemed routine to others, but Arthur knew. She was watching everything, and now, so was he. On the third day since he came back to life, she walked in with a folder of test results in hand. She sat beside the bed, her expression serious, but gentle. I need to know how much you understand, she whispered, without looking at him directly. Arthur slowly turned his eyes toward her and moved his fingers, a signal, the language they had agreed on, one finger for yes, two for no. Gabriella smiled with relief. You're really with me, huh? One finger? Perfect. Let's take it one step at a time. She adjusted the folder in her lap and continued as if talking to any other patient, but her voice carried urgency. Arthur, you need to regain your strength. It'll take time, but your mind is working, and that's already halfway there. Listen, I don't have hard proof yet. Nothing that would make the police act. What I have is what I've seen, what I've heard, and my gut. But I swear, Clara doesn't want to see you get back on your feet. Arthur closed his eyes for a second. It was hard. The pain was more emotional than physical, but there in that hospital bed, even weak, he started to understand. He was in a war, and Clara was the enemy. But now, he wasn't alone anymore. Arthur moved his hand with more strength. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. His throat felt sealed from the inside. Gabriella leaned in and held his hand carefully, like holding something precious about to break. I know, you want to understand everything, but hold on. Let me talk first. Just listen. And then she told him everything, without skipping a detail. Every observation from the past weeks, the secret conversations, the suspicious phone calls, the bits of dialogue she'd overheard in the hallways. She told him about Vinicius, the man Clara was secretly seeing. She even told him about the day she heard that phrase, sharp as a knife. Don't worry, he's not going to wake up. Every word from Gabriella's mouth was like a blade spinning inside Arthur's chest. The pain wasn't just in his injured body anymore. It was in his pride, in his heart, in the memory of everything he'd built with Clara, who now wanted to see him buried. Arthur closed his eyes for a moment, stayed quiet. When he opened them, he raised one finger, their signal. Gabriella understood immediately. You want to know why I'm doing this? He repeated the gesture. Yes. She took a deep breath before answering. Because I know what it's like to be deceived, Arthur. I lived with a man who said he loved me, but he was cheating with the neighbor. I only found out because I saw a message reflected on the car screen. When I confronted him, he flipped the script, said it was my fault, that I was too distant, too cold. She let out a humorless laugh, her eyes moist with old memories. I'm not perfect, but since that day I swore I'd never again pretend not to see what's right in front of me. And what your wife is doing isn't just betrayal, it's cruelty, it's a crime. Arthur looked at her differently now. It wasn't just gratitude, it was trust beginning to form, like he was seeing Gabriella for real for the first time. She stood, walked to the door and checked the hallway. It was empty. She came back quietly. I spoke to the head nurse, asked to be assigned only to your care, said it was to maintain consistency, and they agreed. After all, you're still in a coma, right? She added with a sly wink. She moved closer, whispering, but we have to move fast, Arthur, and be very discreet. If Clara realizes you're back, she might try something else. And next time, it could be too late. He nodded slightly, but clearly, yes. She smiled. We're getting out of this, but you have to trust me, truly. No rash moves, don't call anyone, just the two of us, until the right moment. Arthur raised a finger again. He wanted to know, what's the plan? Gabriella pulled up a chair, sat close to the bed and spoke with barely any movement of her lips. First, you keep pretending you're unconscious. Don't react. Don't give anything away. Second, I'll try to record more conversations between her and Vinicius. I got one already, but I need more evidence. Third, we'll contact a lawyer you trust, but he'll have to come here in secret. Nothing can leak. Arthur closed his eyes in agreement. When he opened them again, he forced his lips to move. The word came out barely audible. Name? Gabriella understood. Vinicius Duarte. From what I know, he claims to be a businessman, but he's never shown up here. She's careful, always calls him from places without cameras, hides everything well. Arthur processed the information silently. His eyes closed again, but now there was something different in them. A fire lit, maybe a memory, or a puzzle piece finally fitting into place. Gabriella fluffed his pillow, adjusted the lights, and stayed a moment longer by his side. You need to rest, but promise me you'll keep pretending. One finger lifted. Yes. She smiled, calm on the outside, but inside, a storm. She knew Clara could walk through that door at any moment, and if she suspected anything, the whole plan would fall apart. There was no room for error. The room fell into silence, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor filling the air, marking Arthur's life, a life returning not just in heartbeats but with purpose. Arthur lay still in the bed, eyes closed, breathing steady, face calm, but inside his heart pounded like a war drum. His mind raced. He was a different man now, no longer the one who'd arrived unconscious. He knew about the betrayal, the danger, the name of the lover, and most of all, he understood. He was alone in a battle no one knew was happening. By late afternoon, Clara showed up, as always, flawless, hair-styled, makeup perfect, a sweet and striking perfume that filled the room before she even stepped inside. She carried flowers in her hands, a friendly smile on her face, and some random story about traffic. A well-rehearsed act. Gabriella, alert, had already given Arthur the agreed-upon signal. He was ready. Clara entered the room with soft steps. She placed the flowers on the table, pulled a chair next to the bed, and sat down. She played her role perfectly, adjusted the blanket, gently caressed his arm, and sat in silence for a few moments before letting out a tired sigh. "Arthur, you have no idea how hard all this has been for me." Her voice came syrupy, almost sorrowful, as if there were still love, as if it were all real. "The doctor said you're not going to wake up, but I come here every day, okay? Even if no one believes it, because I still care about you." Arthur remained still, but inside, he burned. The blood in his veins felt like it was boiling. He took deep breaths, holding it all in. He had to hear it to the end. Her phone vibrated. Clara picked it up without standing. She looked at the screen and answered, smiling faintly. "Hi, love." Arthur cracked his eyes open just slightly, barely enough to see. He kept his body still. "I can't talk much right now. I'm at the hospital," she said naturally, looking at his face. "I'm right next to him, like always." The silence on the other end of the line didn't last long, but it was enough for Arthur to be sure. It was him, Vinicius. "Of course he's not going to wake up," Clara went on, lowering her voice a little, but still audible. "I told you already. The doctor said his brain is damaged. He doesn't respond anymore." Arthur wanted to scream, to sit up and ask if everything she was saying was true. He wanted to confront her, rip the mask off, but he held back. He needed the full truth. It was the only way to expose her. "We just need a little more patience, love," she said, in that voice he now knew was fake. "You think I'm not suffering too, but once this is over, we'll have the life we always dreamed of." Arthur's stomach turned. "I already talked to the lawyer, okay? As soon as they issue the brain death certificate, we can start the estate process. I get everything. No one can contest it. He has no kids, just a distant cousin he hasn't spoken to in years." She let out a muffled, almost mocking laugh. "Relax, Vinicius. Trust me, I'm the wife. It's all mine by right." After that, the silence in the room was heavier than anything she'd said. Arthur shut his eyes tightly, trembling inside. The anger burned like fire under his skin, but he couldn't lose control. Not yet. Clara hung up and stayed there for a moment, looking at the man she believed was helpless. "You were smart, Arthur. Always were. But you made a mistake thinking I'd be on your side forever." She adjusted her blouse, grabbed her purse, and looked at him one last time. "Get some rest, okay? You deserve it." She left the room with the calmness of someone who believes they're winning, like she'd just said goodbye to an old love, when in truth she was walking away certain she had already won. The door closed with a soft click. Moments later, Gabriella came in. She had stayed outside the entire time, listening to everything with a recorder hidden in her pocket. Her eyes were wide, heart racing. She walked straight to the bed. "I heard everything. It's all recorded." Arthur slowly opened his eyes. But now there was something different in his gaze. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was restrained rage, courage, someone who had truly woken up. "I heard," he murmured with effort. Gabriella nodded, trying to steady her nerves. "I had a feeling, but now we have proof. Now we can really act." Arthur took a deep breath. He tried to lift his arm, but his body was still too weak. Still, his mind was sharp, clear and focused. He knew exactly what needed to be done. Gabriella pulled up a chair close to the bed. He spoke with a soft voice, but it carried a new firmness. Now she's going to pay. Arthur didn't sleep a wink that night. His body still barely responded, but his mind was on fire, racing like an engine in overdrive. Clara's words on the phone echoed in his chest like gunshots. He's not waking up. I'll get everything. We'll live the life we always dreamed of. Each phrase cut deeper than the last, and Arthur no longer knew what hurt more, the betrayal, the shock, or the realization that he'd almost died without knowing what was happening around him. But now, it all made sense, and he wasn't going to let it go. At first light, Gabriella came in with a breakfast tray, and her heart pounding louder than her footsteps. A recorder was hidden in her pants pocket. She was tense, but when she saw Arthur's expression, something shifted. He was different now, focused, calm, determined, a man who had chosen to fight. "We're going to strike back," he said, voice still weak but hard as stone. She sat beside him, waiting. How? Arthur took a deep, steady breath. No rush, no outburst. It was clear that every move would be calculated. "First, no one can know I've woken up. Just you. Not the doctors, not the administration, not even the other nurses. If anyone finds out, we lose the element of surprise. Can you keep that secret?" "I can," she answered instantly without hesitation. "Good. Second, I need to talk to Alvaro, my lawyer, but it has to be in person, here at the hospital, and Clara can't have the slightest clue." Gabriella furrowed her brow, thinking fast. "I can try, but how do I explain his visit without raising suspicion?" Arthur smirked. "We don't explain it. He just comes in as a regular visitor. You'll figure it out." She nodded. "I got this. I also need a phone. A secure one, nothing linked to my name." She reached for her own phone, but he shook his head. "That one might be tapped. She has access to more than she lets on. I want a brand new device, new SIM card, all bought with cash, no ID, no name. Only you and I can know it exists." Gabriella wrote it all down on a tiny piece of paper. Every detail now was a domino. If one fell, everything could collapse. And Clara was definitely watching closely. "And what are you going to do with the lawyer?" Arthur stared at the ceiling, as if speaking to fate itself. "I'm going to change my will." Her eyes widened, surprised. "Are you serious?" "More than ever. She's counting on my death to take everything. She's so sure of it that she hasn't even considered I could flip the script. And I will. I'll cut her out of the will and add clauses that block her from taking any action. That buys us time and power." He looked straight at her. "With Alvaro on our side, we're going to pull on this thread. Find out what Clara and this Vinicius guy have been scheming. If he's using my money, if she transferred anything, if there are hidden accounts. I want it all." Gabriella was silent. A thought crossed her mind. "You think she'll try again?" Arthur took a long breath. His gaze hardened. "I don't think. I know." That afternoon, Gabriella went downtown. She bought a basic phone, no apps, no trackers, paid in cash, no ID, no registration. The SIM card was new too. She put it all in a paper sandwich bag and returned to the hospital pretending it was just food. She handed it to Arthur discreetly, saying nothing. He understood. He hid it deep in the bedside drawer, under medical pamphlets and random papers. "Now all that's left is Alvaro," he murmured. Gabriella pulled out the paper with the lawyer's contact info and left with a plan in mind. She called from a public phone near the staff room. When Alvaro picked up, she was direct but careful. She didn't mention the coma, only said she was someone close and that Arthur urgently needed to see him about a personal safety issue. Alvaro hesitated, suspicious, but eventually agreed. He'd be there the next day, early in the afternoon. Gabriella went back to the room and passed on the message. Arthur closed his eyes, took a deep breath. It's starting. The next day, at exactly 2 p.m., Alvaro arrived. Dark suit, briefcase in hand, stern expression. Gabriella greeted him as if he were just another visitor and led him to the room. When he saw Arthur awake, he nearly dropped his briefcase. "My God, you're alive!" "Alive and ready to fight," Arthur replied, voice still hoarse. Alvaro shut the door and walked closer to the bed, lowering his voice. "Who else knows?" Arthur glanced at Gabriela. "Just her, and it's staying that way." He told him everything, from beginning to end. The betrayal, the plan, the calls, the murder attempt, the recording, every detail. Alvaro listened in silence, his expression growing more tense with every word. "I want to change my will today. Take Clara out of everything. Block any move she might try to make. Can you do that?" "I can," the lawyer replied without hesitation. "And I want to know who Vinicius Duarte is. If he has ties to Clara, my companies, my money. I want to know where this guy came from. I know someone who can dig that up fast." Arthur paused, looked seriously at both of them. "After that, we moved to phase 2. Gabriela felt a chill down her spine. "What's phase 2? He answered with a dark gleam in his eyes. "Make her fall into her own trap." Outside, the hospital carried on as usual. Nurses walking back and forth, doctors updating charts, tired relatives visiting, guards sipping coffee at the front desk. But inside room 407, a plan was taking shape. A secret plan, built in silence. And now, the next move could change everything. That's when a new player entered the scene. His name was Gustavo, Dr. Gustavo, an experienced doctor in his early 50s, always cheerful, full of stories to tell, the kind who knew every corner of the hospital and was known by everyone. He had been away for a while. Family health issues, they said. But that week, he returned to work. And not by coincidence, he was assigned to the very wing where Arthur was hospitalized. At first glance, he seemed like just another doctor getting back into routine. But Gabriela, already suspicious of everything, felt uneasy the first time he showed up. There was something about the way that man moved that didn't sit right. On the second day after his return, Gustavo entered Arthur's room with a demeanor that was far too casual, too informal. Unlike the other doctors, he spoke to Arthur as if he were conducting an experiment, testing something hidden between the lines. "Hey, big guy, still in there, huh? A lot of people are rooting for you," he said with a smile while adjusting some cables. "Life's full of surprises." Gabriela, standing nearby, taking vital signs, could barely focus on the numbers. His tone was off. It wasn't empathy. It was provocation, a kind of mockery disguised as friendliness. When he left, Arthur moved his fingers, a small gesture, but significant. One finger, then another. "You felt it too?" Gabriela whispered. Another finger moved. From that moment on, the two began watching Gustavo closely, every gesture, every word, and soon new puzzle pieces started to emerge. During breakfast, Gabriela overheard two nurses chatting. They said they'd seen Gustavo talking to Clara in the hallway 2 days earlier, laughing, speaking in hushed tones like old friends. One of them even joked, "If I didn't know she was married, I'd say they were flirting." But Gabriela knew. That wasn't flirting, it was connection. And too much connection, when not transparent, usually hides something wrong. That night, after her shift, she didn't go home. She hid in a corner of the parking lot, waiting. She needed to be sure, and she was. She saw Gustavo leave alone, heading toward his car. 5 minutes later, Clara appeared and got into the vehicle. The car stayed there in the dark for nearly an hour. She couldn't hear anything, but she didn't need to. The silence said enough. Gabriela returned to the hospital with trembling legs. She entered Arthur's room, shut the door, and spilled everything. "Arthur, something's really wrong. Dr. Gustavo's involved. He and Clara, they've got something going on." Arthur squeezed her hand tightly. He said nothing, just stared at a spot on the wall. But inside, his mind was boiling. The next morning, Gustavo returned to the room. Same smile, same knowing air. "Hello, Dr. Arthur. I know you can't hear me, but..." "Here I am, just following protocol. Gotta keep everything monitored, right?" He checked the equipment with theatrical calm, then stood beside the bed, as if waiting for something. Life's fragile, isn't it? 1 second, everything's fine. The next, it's over. That's why it's good to keep everything in order. Wills, documents, you never know. Gabriella entered just then. The tension dissipated at her presence. "Can I help you, doctor?" No, just checking in. Everything under control with our patient, right? Within expected parameters." He gave that same slick smile and left. Gabriella immediately looked at Arthur. He's trying to provoke a reaction. He's suspicious. Arthur moved 2 fingers. So he doesn't know everything yet, but he's close. That's when they understood. Time was running out. It wasn't just Clara and her mysterious lover anymore. There was another player in the game, a dangerous one. With access to records, exams, medications, a doctor. Arthur grabbed the hidden phone with trembling hands and typed a short message to Alvaro. Another one involved. "Doctor, name, Gustavo. Need to investigate." The reply came almost instantly. "I'll dig into him, be careful. This changes everything." From that point on, Gabriella barely slept. She picked up extra shifts, made excuses to always be nearby. Each time Gustavo visited, she logged the time, his behavior, what he touched. She even left a voice recorder hidden behind the bedside monitor. That's how she caught something important. During one visit, without realizing it, Gustavo answered a call inside the room. The recorder captured everything. "Yeah, same as before, but the nurse is hovering too much. We'll have to speed this up." Silence. "I told you, it's just the wrong dose. No one's going to suspect a thing." Gabriella froze. Her heart raced. She rushed back to the room, put on her headphones, and listened to the entire recording. She didn't want to believe it, but now there was no doubt. They weren't just waiting for Arthur to die, they were making it happen. Gustavo had a cold, calculated, poisonous plan. He wanted to get rid of Arthur with a fatal dose, disguised as treatment, leaving no trace. Subtle, cruel. But what he didn't count on was Gabriella being 1 step ahead. That sweltering late afternoon, she walked into the hospital room and locked the door behind her. Her eyes were teary, but her hands steady. She handed the phone to Arthur. "Listen to this." The audio played. Every word from Gustavo was a knife slicing through the silence. Arthur listened, eyes wide. His breathing grew heavy, like he was carrying the weight of the world. It wasn't fear, it was rage, pain, and the certainty that they were trying to kill him. "He's going to die," said the voice on the recording. When it ended, Arthur murmured in a hoarse, almost animal voice, "He's going to pay for this." Gabriella knelt by the bed and held his hand tightly. "We won't let them, I swear. He's never laying a hand on you again." Arthur continued to fake his coma, turned to the side, unmoving. But inside, his mind was more awake than ever. Every sound in the hallway was an alarm. Every doorknob click, a possible attack. Death seemed to be lurking, dressed in a white coat, waiting for a slip. That dark night, without turning on the light, Gabriella and Arthur quietly devised a plan. Low voices, high fears. The plan was simple. Arthur would pretend he was deteriorating. Slower breathing, no responses. Gabriella would alter his medical data, showing signs of collapse, plummeting blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, imminent failure. That would make Clara act. And wherever Clara went, Gustavo followed. They knew those two were way too predictable when they thought they'd won. Gabriella arrived early at the hospital, like someone carrying a secret in her pocket. She sent a message to the lawyer. "Plan in motion. Get ready." Then she stopped by the head nurse's office. "The patient in bed 07 is showing some changes, nothing critical but outside the normal range." And only she knew how to manipulate that pattern. The charts showed just enough to draw attention, but not enough to raise suspicion. Just enough for Clara to let her guard down. By late afternoon, Clara showed up. Vain, over the top. Tight dress, flawless makeup, high heels. Like she was heading to a party, not visiting a patient. When she walked into the room and saw Arthur still, she sighed in relief. "Still sleeping?" she muttered, as if talking to herself. But she wasn't alone. Gabriella was listening from the hallway, recorder on, in her pocket. Clara pulled out her phone and dialed. "Hey, it's me. It's the same. The nurse said he got worse. I think it's really close now." Pause. "Yes, Gustavo, tonight. He said this is the right moment." Another pause. "We're getting out of this. I promise you." Gabriella wrote everything down. Every word, every second. She sent a short voice note to the lawyer. "Tonight, Gustavo's making his move during the night shift." Arthur, lying still, responded with a slight twitch of his finger. By 9 p.m., the hospital was too quiet. Skeleton crew, silent halls. Gabriella pretended to be tired, buried in paperwork, but her mind was sharp, heart racing. At 9:20 he arrived. Gustavo, white coat, fake smile. "Good evening." "Good evening, doctor," Gabriella replied, trying to sound casual. "Just going to take a quick look at our patient." She pointed at the clipboard. "Vitals are weaker, but still stable." "Great. I'll go take a look." He walked down the corridor. Gabriella counted to 10. She grabbed her hidden phone, turned on the covert camera app, slipped it into her pocket with the lens facing out and followed. When she entered the room, she saw Gustavo with his back to her, rummaging through one of the instrument drawers. Arthur remained still, breathing slowly, perfect in his performance. "Need any help?" Gabriella asked sweetly. No, just organizing some materials real quick." Gustavo tried to play it cool, but he wasn't good at it. He grabbed a syringe filled with a clear liquid and placed it on the metal tray. The label was turned down, she noticed. "What's that?" "Just a booster dose of the sedative. He's agitated on the inside. Better to keep him calm." "That's not on the chart," she said firmly. "I authorized it. You can update the notes later." Gabriella's stomach turned. That was it. The dose. The attempt. She stepped closer and gently took the tray. "Doctor, you're not allowed to administer anything not in the official records. That's protocol." He forced a smile. "Gabriella, let's cooperate. I know what I'm doing." "So do I," she said, locking eyes with him. She lifted the syringe and spoke loud and clear. "This is going to the lab right now. And you're going to have to explain why you tried to administer something off record." Gustavo turned pale. "Are you accusing me of something?" "Attempted murder." At that moment, 2 security guards entered the room. With them was Alvaro, the lawyer, phone in hand, recording everything. "It's all documented, Dr. Gustavo. What were you trying to inject? What did you say on the phone? This is going to the police, now." The game had changed. Death didn't arrive that night, but justice did. Gustavo tried to flee, took 2 steps, but was blocked by security. He started shouting out of control, claiming it was all a setup, that they were making it up, that he knew nothing. But in that moment, a voice echoed from the hospital bed that had seemed lifeless. "You made the mistake of underestimating me." It was Arthur, his eyes open, focused, staring straight at the doctor's face. Gustavo froze. The color drained from his face. Sweat poured. He had no reply. He just stood there, stunned, as he was escorted to the admin office. Alvaro walked right behind, holding the phone with the recording that exposed everything. Gabriella walked to the bedside, eyes full of emotion. "We did it." Arthur took a deep breath. "Now there's just her." 2 days had passed since the failed murder attempt. The atmosphere in the hospital was still tense. The hallways buzzed with whispers. Officially, the administration said the doctor had been removed for ethical concerns, and everything would be investigated internally. But the truth was spreading like wildfire. Nurses exchanged suspicious glances. Doctors spoke in code. Staff avoided eye contact. It was clear this scandal was bigger than any memo could contain. The only one still walking around carefree was Clara. She still believed Arthur was comatose, stuck in bed, unaware, while she got ready to collect the rewards of his death. In her mind, Gustavo had already handled everything. In a few days, the inheritance would be released, the estate processed, and her freedom complete. Little did she know the game had flipped. Arthur was awake. More than that, he was in control. Gabriella stayed on alert, slept little, watched everything, locked the door from inside. Any strange movement, Any visit at the wrong time, she messaged the lawyer immediately. Now that Gustavo was out of the picture, it was time for the next move: protect the money. Arthur knew Clara would try to get her hands on the inheritance the moment she had a brain death certificate. Time was short. That's why he called Alvaro urgently. This time, the visit wouldn't be hidden. It would be official. On that Wednesday morning, Alvaro arrived at the hospital with a heavy envelope under his arm. Dark suit, buttoned-up shirt, glasses hanging from his collar. He looked like a man ready to close one chapter and start another. He went straight to Arthur's room where Gabriela was already waiting. The room was ready, everything in place, bed made, sunlight pouring gently through the window, and the heart monitor showing a steady rhythm. When Alvaro walked in and saw Arthur sitting up, stronger than last time, he smiled. "You're better, steady and angry, the perfect combo." Arthur didn't take his eyes off the envelope. "You brought everything?" Alvaro sat beside the bed and opened the papers. They were the official documents to completely change the will. Clara was now excluded from any automatic claim over Arthur's estate. In her place, a distant cousin, trustworthy and discreet, had been named the new primary beneficiary. And to prevent surprises, Arthur added clauses that blocked any financial transactions if his death was deemed suspicious. "This will block any attempt to access your assets," Alvaro explained. "It also authorizes a full audit of your accounts. If she moved any funds without permission, we'll find out." Arthur nodded with certainty. "She did. I'm sure of it. If we confirm that, she'll face theft charges. Combined with attempted murder, her situation escalates quickly." Gabriela stepped closer to the bed. "And she doesn't know anything yet?" Alvaro smirked. "Not yet, but she will soon." Arthur looked at them both, resolute. "I want her to know." Gabriela frowned. "What do you mean?" "I want her to get the news of the will change officially, in front of everyone. No warning." Alvaro raised an eyebrow, then nodded with a grin. "You want the surprise factor." "Exactly. She'll think she's about to cash in, and she'll find out she has nothing." Gabriela's eyes widened. "That's going to hit hard." "And it's just the beginning," Arthur replied, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Alvaro stacked the documents on the side table, handed over the pen. Arthur, still with a trembling hand, gripped it firmly and signed each page with the determination of a man who knows exactly what he's doing. It wasn't just a signature, it was a sentence. Clara thought she was 2 steps ahead, but now, without realizing it, she was being overtaken, and with style. The next day, Alvaro sent Clara a message, keeping up appearances. "Clara, we need to discuss the procedures regarding Arthur's will. Can you come to the hospital tomorrow?" She replied quickly. "Of course. What time?" 2 p.m. Arthur, aware of everything, asked Gabriela to make him presentable for the meeting. With her help, he showered, shaved, and swapped the hospital gown for a simple shirt and pajama pants. He wanted to be awake, or as close to it as possible, when Clara walked in. He wanted to see her reaction, the shock, the fear, the shame. The next day, 15 minutes before 2, Gabriela locked the room with Arthur inside and waited for Clara in the lobby next to Alvaro. Clara arrived on time, as always, elegant, made up, with that air of someone already convinced she had won. "Good afternoon," she said, smiling. "Arthur is stable, but let's get straight to the point." "The room is ready," Alvaro replied, serious. Clara followed them to a private room in the hospital where there was a table, 2 chairs, and paperwork laid out. She noticed an admin staff member sitting in the corner, but didn't question it, assuming it was just protocol. Alvaro sat down, opened the documents, and handed her a sheet. "Here's the updated version of the will. As requested by the family, all changes were officially registered yesterday." Clara took the sheet calmly, still holding onto her confident little smirk. But as she read, her expression changed. Her brow furrowed, her lips tightened, her hand began to tremble. "This must be wrong," she said. "It's not. It was updated directly with Arthur's signature and registered at the notary," Alvaro replied calmly. "But he couldn't have signed. He's in a coma." Silence. Gabriela looked at her, firm. "He's not anymore." Clara turned to her, confused. What do you mean? He's been awake since before Gustavo tried to kill him, and he knows everything. The floor seemed to vanish beneath Clara's feet. She froze, paralyzed, with no idea what to say or do. Alvaro stood up. Clara, you lost, and you don't even realize how much yet. Clara left the room pale-faced, without saying a word, without crying, screaming, or explaining. She simply grabbed her purse and walked out quickly, without looking back. But what no one realized at that moment was that she didn't leave to give up. She left to think, to plan, and most of all, to try one last move, her final card. She vanished for the rest of the day. Didn't answer messages, didn't call anyone, not even Vinicius. But she was far from accepting defeat. She sat in the back seat of her car, turned the AC on full blast, and sat there for hours, staring into nothing. Her mind was a storm. That night she showed up at the hospital. No makeup, no heels, no signature smile. Her face was marked from crying, but her eyes still burned with rage. She walked straight past the front desk, headed to the ICU, and asked to see her husband. It's an emergency visit. I need to speak with him, just him and me. The receptionist hesitated, but since Clara was still legally his wife, she allowed it. Gabriella, who was on duty, saw everything on the security monitor. The moment she realized Clara was heading to the room alone, she rushed to the nurse's station, grabbed her hidden phone, and called Artur directly. She's coming alone. Don't let her get close. Artur was ready. Since learning she knew he was awake, he knew she would try something. Now more than ever, she was dangerous. Clara entered the room slowly, closed the door gently behind her, and locked it. The lights were dim, with only the hallway light filtering through the glass panel in the door. Artur was sitting up, slightly inclined, face serious, waiting. She stood in front of the bed, stared at him for a few seconds, then spoke. So it's true. You really woke up? He didn't respond, just stared at her coldly. You didn't tell me. Didn't even give me a chance to explain. Artur raised his eyebrows as if to say, explain what? I know it looks awful, okay? But you don't understand. I was suffocating, Artur. That life, that routine, it was all for show. You didn't see me anymore, didn't touch me. I felt invisible. He took a deep breath, still silent. I met Vinicius at a moment when I was alone. He gave me attention, listened to me, made me feel alive again. And yes, I thought about running away, leaving it all behind. But I never, she hesitated, never truly wanted to kill you. Artur moved his head slightly as if to laugh, but didn't. Just a bitter twist at the corner of his mouth. Clara took 2 steps closer to the bed. We can still fix this. You can reverse everything. I don't want the money. I just want to start over. Leave all this behind and start fresh. You can give me that. Artur finally spoke, voice dry. You had a choice. Many. And you chose to erase me. She lowered her head, then looked up again. Her expression changed. No longer the look of a repentant woman. Now it was the look of someone who realized they had nothing left to lose. So that's it? You're going to send me to jail? You did that to yourself, he replied. She suddenly reached into her bag in a quick motion. Artur flinched. For a second, he thought Clara was pulling out a weapon or a syringe like the one Gustavo used. His heart raced, his body tensed. But what she pulled out was a small glass vial, transparent, with liquid inside. The label had been torn off. Whatever it wasn't good. If you think you're getting out of this on top, you're dead wrong, she said, eyes blazing with hatred. I'm ending this right now. Almost automatically, Artur pressed the emergency button beside the bed. The silent alarm he and Gabriella had planned connected straight to the nurse's station, silent but deadly. There's no time left, Clara screamed, panicking. I won't let you destroy my life. In a frenzy, she lunged at him with the vial uncapped, aiming for the IV hanging by the bed. But before the liquid could touch the line, the door burst open. Gabriella rushed in, followed by 2 security guards. One of them grabbed Clara, pulling her back hard. The vial slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. The contents spread across the white tile, seeping like poison. Clara thrashed, screamed, kicked. He set me up. It's all lies. This is revenge. He's trying to ruin me. Artur stared into her eyes, calm but firm. You already did that yourself. Gabriela took the cloth from her pocket, crouched down, and carefully collected the broken vial into a plastic bag. Just then, Alvaro appeared at the door with 2 police officers. Everything had been planned. They had anticipated her every move. Clara was taken away in handcuffs, crying, screaming, begging, but no one believed her anymore. Not even herself. Artur remained still, watching the empty hallway. Silence, just the distant echo of hurried footsteps. Gabriela walked up and stood beside him, looking too. Is it over? He shook his head, steady. Not yet. There's still the other one. The chaos passed, and the hospital returned to its usual rhythm. Clara was in custody. The vial had been collected and was already under analysis. The police were investigating her past, along with Vinicius's and Gustavo's. Many puzzle pieces were falling into place, but one, in particular, still didn't fit. Artur felt it like a splinter in his mind. Who was Vinicius, really? Where did he come from? How did he insert himself so quickly into Clara's life? What did she see in him? Why trust him so much, enough to risk everything for that guy? By late afternoon, Artur asked to speak to Alvaro. The lawyer walked in looking tired, suit wrinkled, arms full of papers. We've got news on this Vinicius Duarte, he said bluntly. Artur adjusted himself in bed, propped the pillow behind his back, and nodded for him to continue. This guy isn't who he says he is. He claims to be a businessman, but he has no CNPJ, no company registration, nothing. He also has no consistent professional history. In the last 5 years, he's changed cities 3 times, and he has a criminal record, fraud, theft, and an old assault charge. Artur took a deep breath. He had been expecting something like this, but what came next took his breath away. There's more, Alvaro continued. His last name, Duarte. It's the same as Gustavo's mother's. Artur furrowed his brow, confused. What do you mean? We pulled the records. Gustavo's mother, before she got married, was named Vera Duarte, and Vinicius is Vera's son, but there's no mention of his father anywhere. He only has a simple birth certificate with no paternal information. The silence in the room settled like a weight. Gabriela, who had been listening, leaning against the wall, exchanged a glance with Artur. They both understood at the same time. Are they father and son? Artur asked, his voice low, as if he still didn't want to believe it. Everything points to yes, Alvaro replied. And there's one more detail. 2 years ago, Gustavo started paying rent for an apartment in someone else's name. The address? The same one where Vinicius lives today. The pieces clicked into place. Artur closed his eyes for a second. This was bigger than he had imagined. The missing piece of the puzzle had just fallen into place, and the picture was much darker than it seemed. For a few seconds, Artur couldn't react. His whole body shook lightly, as if a shock had passed through him. Clara's betrayal had already been hard to swallow, but discovering that the doctor who almost took his life was the father of the man she was betraying him with and conspiring to kill him, that was another level of pain, another level of poison. It hadn't all started with her. It hadn't started with the accident. It was before, a long time before, he murmured, almost as if talking to himself. Alvaro, standing next to the bed, nodded. Gustavo met Clara years ago. We don't know exactly how yet, but it's almost certain that he's the one who put her in your life, like a piece on a chessboard. Gabriela brought her hand to her mouth, shocked. Are you saying that she was placed in his path on purpose? That's what everything points to, Alvaro replied. Clara may have truly fallen in love with Vinicius. She may have thought she was in control, but she was part of something bigger. The one who wanted to destroy Artur was Gustavo, and he used his own son as bait. Artur closed his eyes, taking a slow breath, trying to organize his thoughts. And everything finally clicked. Clara's absurd trust in Vinicius, how he appeared in her life out of nowhere. Gustavo's silent, dark involvement, the way he tried to influence medical decisions at the hospital. It was an old plan, a cold plan, a patient plan. They had only been waiting for the right moment. And what does the police say about all this? Artur asked, still not looking at anyone. We've already delivered all the documents, Alvaro replied. Now that there's this family connection, the investigation has treated the case as a possible criminal organization. They're after Vinicius. It looks like he fled the city yesterday as soon as he found out about Clara's arrest. Artur was silent for a while. Then he said, "He's going to try to disappear." Alvaro nodded. "He will." But he left traces. Gabriela, who had been listening silently, approached. "Do you think Vinicius is the leader of all this?" Artur shook his head without hesitation. "No, he's just a puppet. The brain is Gustavo." The room fell into heavy silence. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm as if nothing had happened, but inside, everything had changed. "They studied me," Artur said, his voice thick. "They knew where I went, my schedule, how I thought. Clara served to distract me. Vinicius was the emotional trap, and Gustavo, he waited for the moment when I was most vulnerable." Gabriela lowered her eyes, feeling the impact. With each new detail, the hole seemed deeper. "But why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would someone do this to you?" Artur took a moment to answer, his gaze lost in nothingness, as if searching for an old memory, hidden in a dark corner of his mind. "Gustavo and I studied together, same university. I went into business, he stayed in medicine. Once he tried to open a clinic and asked for my support. I refused. I said I didn't trust his methods. Since then, he never contacted me again. He disappeared," Alvaro added in a firm tone, "and spent the last few years creating a monster." Artur looked at the ceiling, his eyes heavy. "I thought the worst pain was being betrayed by someone who sleeps next to you, but being hunted by someone you didn't even remember anymore is even worse." Gabriela approached the bed, determined, and now Artur raised his gaze firmer than ever. "Now we hunt him." The rest of the day passed in silence, not out of weakness but by choice. Artur was preparing, his mind, his body, the moment. It was no longer about defending himself. It was about showing who he truly was, showing that those who tried to destroy him would taste their own poison. Gabriela stayed close, silent, but alert. She knew the moment would come. And when it did, there would be no turning back. Artur wanted it to be personal. He wanted to look Clara in the eyes. He wanted her to see that he hadn't been erased. And more, he wanted Gustavo and Vinicius to be together when the truth exploded. That's when Alvaro came up with the plan. He went to the police chief, and together they prepared a trap. Nothing illegal, everything within the law, but with intelligence. Vinicius had disappeared, but he still kept in touch with a distant cousin. Through this cousin, they managed to set up the ideal scenario. He said that Vinicius had sent a message saying he would return to get some documents and money, that he had a plan to flee the country. The police tracked the agreed location, an old abandoned warehouse in a forgotten industrial zone of the city. The perfect place, isolated, quiet. Artur was informed of everything and made a single request. "I want to be there. I want to see it with my own eyes." Alvaro hesitated. "You're still recovering. It's not safe." "I'm not asking, I'm going." Gabriela helped with the preparations. Light clothing, a cap, sunglasses, a car with tinted windows. The police set everything up around the warehouse discreetly. No visible police cars, plainclothes agents. On the scheduled day, Artur got into the car with Alvaro's help. His body still felt pain, but his mind was sharper than ever. His heart beat like a war drum. They arrived half an hour early. The police were already in position. Gabriela, in disguise, was inside the warehouse, pretending to be part of the cousins' team. The place was dark, filled with stacked boxes, the smell of rust and the past. A place where stories died and were reborn. At 7:32 p.m., a black car stopped at the entrance. Two men got out. Vinicius came first, Gustavo right behind. Gabriela saw everything and radioed in. "They've arrived. They're going in." Artur got out of the car slowly, with help. Every step was like walking over his own wounds. Inside, Vinicius was pacing back and forth, tense. "Where's the cousin?" "He said he'd be here." "He should be arriving," Gustavo replied. Calmer, colder. Vinicius didn't seem to believe it. He was sweating, glancing at the door constantly. Then it opened. Arthur entered. No rush, no fear. Vinicius froze, his mouth slightly open, unable to make a sound. Gustavo took a second longer to understand. When he recognized Arthur's face, he stepped back as if he had been punched by an invisible force. The hunt had turned, and the game had just begun. Arthur stopped a few meters away from the group. Were they expecting someone else? But no one answered. Their plan seemed perfect, well thought out, with no visible flaws. It worked up to a certain point, but something was missing, a basic thing that no one had noticed. Gustavo tried to regain his composure, but Arthur's presence was undeniable. "Arthur, you shouldn't be here." "But I am." "And should you be?" Silence took over the warehouse until Vinicius, standing next to Gustavo, still couldn't say a word. His pale, tense face displayed the terror of someone face to face with the man he thought had been erased, consumed from within, unrecognizable. The man he had tried to destroy, manipulating a woman as bait. "You used Clara, Gustavo? You used your own son." "What for? To get revenge for some old mistake." Gustavo, furious, suddenly shouted, "You destroyed my dream, Arthur. You humiliated me in front of investors. You said I was unstable, made me look like a failure. You closed doors I've never been able to open again." Arthur took a step forward, closer, his voice calm but full of controlled rage. "And that gave you the right to destroy my life? You don't understand, do you? I raised Vinicius alone. He had nothing. I promised him a better life, and you had everything. You had everything. I had a wife. You took her from me. I had my company. You tried to take it. I had my peace, and you destroyed it." Gustavo, gasping for breath, glared at Arthur with deep hatred. But Vinicius, standing between the two, lowered his head as if he was finally understanding the extent of the manipulation he had endured. Arthur, with a cold gaze, asked the question everyone had been waiting to hear. "He manipulated you, didn't he, Vinicius?" Vinicius, stammering, tried to justify himself, but his voice betrayed his confusion. I thought it was love. He said we'd only be free if you were out of the way." Arthur looked at him with silent disdain. "Free? You were never imprisoned. You only chained yourself to the plan of a coward." Then the door opened, and the police entered. 3 armed officers surrounded the two. The sound of commands echoed through the warehouse. "Hands up, no movement!" Gustavo tried to argue desperately. "You have no proof. This is just theater." That's when Alvaro entered, carrying a folder, his face serious. "Here are the recordings, conversations, transfers, and the rental contract you paid for Vinicius. It's all here." Before Gustavo could protest, he tried to run, but was immediately restrained. Vinicius, on the other hand, didn't move. Deep down, he knew the end had come. Arthur gave one last look at both of them, their heads lowered, handcuffed, and walked away, his head held high, for the first time in a long while, feeling light. The warehouse was surrounded. The police already had the evidence. Vinicius on one side, Gustavo on the other. The silence was thick, heavy, the kind of silence that only comes when the truth finally arrives, and everything that was built crumbles. But in the confusion of the arrest, with the police entering and the flashes of cell phones firing, no one noticed what Vinicius had hidden in his pants pocket. Something small, but important. A key. Not just any key, but the key to a motorcycle. While the police focused on taking Gustavo out, cursing and trying to reverse the situation with shouting, Vinicius took a step to the side, as if he just needed to breathe, and with a quick glance, saw his chance. He ran. He cut through the back of the warehouse, passed through an emergency exit leading to a side alley, an unblocked route. They shouted his name, but he was already far, running fast. Gabriela, who had stayed with Arthur, ran up to him, alarmed. He escaped. Vinicius escaped. Arthur stood frozen, unable to believe it. "What do you mean, escaped?" He knew. He knew someone had set everything up, that there was an escape route. The back exit hadn't been blocked. Desperate, he ran to the side. Vinicius was already 3 steps ahead. The young man jumped a fence, ran through an empty lot, and reached an abandoned shack just 3 blocks away from the warehouse. Under a torn blue tarp was the motorcycle, a 650cc, powerful, with a full tank. Without wasting time, he got on the bike, started the engine with a precise twist, and accelerated. The roar of the motorcycle cut through the night's tranquility, echoing through the city. The police outside heard the sound and started shouting, trying to organize a chase, but Vinicius was already at an advantage. He knew every street, knew where there were construction sites, where the speed cameras were turned off. He had planned everything, anticipated it. In the car, Arthur punched the dashboard, nervous and frustrated. "He was ahead of me." Alvaro, trying to stay calm in the passenger seat, looked at him. "The police will catch him. He has nowhere to run. He's smart, but he won't go to the airport or the bus station. He'll hide, disappear, change identities if necessary." Gabriella, in the back seat, was speaking to a police officer on the phone. "They're trying to intercept him on the ring road, but it's difficult. He's cutting through neighborhoods. It's going to be complicated." Arthur lowered his head, feeling the blood boil in his veins. His body was trembling. It was as if, after all this time, a ghost had escaped right when he thought he was free. Vinicius was speeding across the city bridge, adrenaline coursing through his veins. At any moment he could get caught, and he narrowly avoided colliding with a truck coming in the opposite direction. After a sharp swerve, he entered a rural area where the cell phone signal barely existed. It was there he made a drastic decision. He turned off the phone's tracker, took out the SIM card, and threw it into a drain. Everything was being done automatically, almost as if his body was acting on its own. He knew he only needed 24 hours to reach the right place, the house of an old childhood friend, someone who owed favors, someone who, by luck or necessity, was off the radar. There, a new identity awaited him. A fake ID, a fake CPF, and more importantly, a new chance to start over. He continued down the dirt road, where the bike disappeared into the tall grass. A perfect hiding place, at least for now. Meanwhile, at the police station, Gustavo was having a nervous breakdown. He couldn't control his anger and frustration. "What are you doing? He's going to disappear. I told you not to trust him." One of the officers, tired of the shouting, slammed his hand on the table. "Shut up, Gustavo. You'll have to answer for everything. And if your son escapes, you're going down with him." Outside, Arthur arrived with Gabriella's help. The delegate approached, greeting them with a firmness that, for a moment, seemed like the only thing left. "I know everything seems out of control," she said, "but we'll get him. The national alert has already been issued. His photo is at all airports, bus stations, and borders. He has nowhere to hide." Arthur didn't respond immediately. He stood in silence for a moment, looking down. When he raised his eyes, he spoke with cold determination. "I don't just want to catch him. I want him to see that nothing he did was worth it." The delegate nodded. "He'll see." At the hospital, Gabriella entered Arthur's room. He was there to finish a treatment that seemed endless. His body was recovering, but his mind was far from that. There was something inside him that couldn't heal. The feeling that the game was still not over, that the most unpredictable piece of the puzzle was still loose. Gabriella sat beside him and asked softly, as if she understood the pain, "Do you think he'll disappear forever?" Arthur looked at her for a long moment before responding, "I think he'll come back." Gabriella stared at him, a bit surprised. "Why?" "Because he's like his father, too proud to accept defeat." She squeezed his hand tightly, as if the gesture was a silent promise. "Then we wait." He looked at her, serious, tired, but determined. "And this time, we'll be ready." Vinicius spent 4 days off the radar, 4 days in which his face appeared on all the news, social media, and police programs. Before, he was the mysterious, handsome guy, but now he was plastered on posters with the word "Wanted" written in red. Even so, he kept escaping because he knew how to hide, use the right spots, and the right people. The strategy? Wrong. He still believed he could get away with it. The motorcycle was left in a thicket near a stream in the countryside. A farmer found it and called the police, marking the first concrete lead. Vinicius's second mistake was a silly one. He made a purchase at a secluded grocery store, paying with a $50 note, which had a police investigation code marked on it. The police were already tracking a vehicle trafficking investigation, and by a stroke of luck, or bad luck, depending on how you look at it, Vinicius used one of these marked notes. The police then cross-referenced the time of the purchase with the images from the street security camera and quickly identified the car he was using, an old silver Uno with a fake license plate. The vehicle had been borrowed from an old childhood acquaintance, someone with a criminal record who thought he was just helping with a couple's problem. The police, unhurried but precise, began to follow the trail. Meanwhile, Arthur was in the hospital learning to walk again with help. The doctors were surprised at his recovery, which was going better than expected, but Arthur seemed distant, as though it wasn't enough. He spent hours sitting on the porch, looking at the street below, as if waiting for Vinicius to turn the corner at any moment. Gabriela was by his side the entire time. She was no longer just the nurse. She was the only person he trusted. She brought him coffee, tried to talk about anything that could distract him, but Arthur always returned to the same point. When he falls, I'll be ready. On the afternoon of the 5th day, the police received an anonymous tip. An employee from a gas station recognized Vinicius's car parked there. The driver appeared nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder as if he knew he was wanted. The police acted quickly. They arrived without sirens, without visible uniforms, surrounding the station from the back. When Vinicius realized there was no way to escape, he tried to speed off in the car, but it was too late. A patrol car blocked his front, and another car hit his rear. He was caught. He got out of the vehicle with his hands up, sweating and with bloodshot eyes. He wasn't crying, but his look said it all. He was finished. There was no more resistance. He was handcuffed to the car's hood. One officer read him his rights, while another took pictures, all in silence. It was over, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Arthur was sitting in the hospital drinking coffee when the police chief arrived. There was no fanfare. She entered slowly, holding an envelope. "He's been arrested," she said bluntly. Arthur remained silent for a few seconds, then looked at her with eyes heavy from deep exhaustion, as if relief had been delayed for too long. "On the road near Itapeva," he said, almost like a distant memory. "Tried to run again, but didn't stand a chance." Gabriela walked into the room just at that moment, hearing the news that seemed to change everything. She stood there, waiting for a reaction from Arthur. He took the envelope the officer handed him and slowly opened it. Inside, there was the police record, photos from the arrest, and a note about Vinicius's testimony the following day. "He'll try to deny it," Arthur said, looking at the documents with a heavy expression. "Maybe," the officer replied, "but we have everything. Recordings, screenshots, transfers, and of course his father's testimony. Doctor, Gustavo turned him in completely, throwing Vinicius under the bus to try and reduce his own sentence." Arthur wasn't surprised by this. It was exactly the kind of move someone like Gustavo would make, always thinking about saving himself. With a bitter smile, he murmured, "Father of the Year." The officer stayed for a few more minutes, explaining the next steps, but soon left. When the door closed, silence filled the room. Gabriela approached, sat next to Arthur, and looked out the window. "How are you feeling?" she asked, breaking the silence. Arthur took some time to answer. Finally, he spoke with a tired but honest voice, relief and exhaustion. Then he thought for a moment and added, "Did you win, Arthur?" she asked with a small smile. He slowly shook his head. "No, I survived. Now I need to rebuild everything, the company, my mind, my life." Gabriela held his hand tightly, looking directly into his eyes. "And you won't do that alone." He stared at her for a moment, and for the first time in days, he smiled, a small, genuine smile. Just then, the phone in the room rang. It was Alvaro. "The press knows about the arrest. They're asking for an interview with you." Arthur sighed. I don't want to. Alvaro, not pressing further, replied, That's fine, but if you ever decide to tell your story, the whole of Brazil will hear it. Arthur hung up without responding, already focusing on what truly mattered. Outside, the sky was starting to darken, but inside the room, for the first time in a long time, peace began to settle in. The next morning, Arthur was discharged. The day was cloudy, with a grey sky, undecided between opening up or closing. When he left the hospital, he pushed his wheelchair by himself, refusing any help. Gabriela was beside him, but she didn't intervene. She respected his space, the silence he needed, and above all, the silent pain that still consumed him. Arthur was no longer the same. His body was thinner, his face more closed, his eyes sunken, but there was something different now, something he carried, a firm look marked by experience, having faced death and returned with a strength that only those who have gone through hell possess. The lawyer's car, Alvaro, was already waiting for him at the door. He put Arthur's few bags in the trunk, still with a look that couldn't believe this was real. I never imagined we'd get out of this like this, he said, not hiding his surprise. Arthur only nodded, wanting to leave there, breathe in new air and see a different view. He didn't want to go back to the mansion. The house, now empty, was a heavy place, full of false memories, traps and lies. He asked to be taken to a small apartment in a remote neighborhood where no one knew him. No doorman asking questions, no curious neighbors. He just wanted peace. The first few days were hard, a constant struggle against his own ghosts. Arthur woke up in the middle of the night, sweating, with the sound of the car crash still echoing in his mind, Clara's fake crying face, and Vinicius's voice saying, Trust me. He sat on the edge of the bed, breathing deeply, trying to push those images away. Sometimes he slept in the armchair, with the TV on, just to avoid being in the dark, alone with his thoughts. Gabriela called every day, sometimes just to hear his breath, sometimes to talk about nonsense, or just to stay silent. Have you eaten? She asked, with her usual softness. I'm trying, he replied. I went outside for a bit, sat on the balcony. She didn't pressure him, she was just there. One morning, she showed up unannounced, bringing cheese bread and hot coffee. I thought we could have breakfast together, she said, smiling. Arthur looked at her as if he didn't quite understand. Then he cleared a space on the table and pointed to the chair. Sit. It was there, in that simple moment, that something began to change. Slowly, he started to take control of the company's affairs again. He called Alvaro to review documents, organize contracts, change passwords, and close accesses that were still in Clara's hands. He asked to review the accounts, analyze the cash flow, everything that had been left behind in the last 2 years. He wanted to clean up the mess they had left. On the first day back at the office, the employees were in shock. No one knew he would return so soon, and certainly not with a firm face, clear voice, and no nonsense. I'm not going to make speeches, he said. I just want to work. Anyone who's not with me can leave now. No one left. Arthur had distanced himself from the chaos, adopting a new routine that reflected who he was becoming. He arrived early at the office and left early too. He greeted people with a firm good morning, looking them in the eye, but without engaging in extended conversations. He avoided journalists, cancelled meetings with those he no longer trusted. It was a total cleanup, not only at work but in his personal life as well. He sold 2 cars, donated half of his clothes, and distanced himself from places and people that no longer made sense. Slowly, he began rebuilding his life, something smaller, simpler, but more genuine. The new version of Arthur fit better with who he was now. Meanwhile, Clara was still waiting for her trial. She had changed lawyers 3 times and was trying, in every possible way, to convince the court that she had been manipulated. She claimed she never intended to kill, but the evidence against her was irrefutable. The recordings, the audios, the attempt in the hospital, everything was against her. The chance of escaping punishment was nearly non-existent. Vinicius, for his part, was also awaiting his trial. Imprisoned and unusually silent, he tried to negotiate a plea deal, but no one was willing to listen to him. Gustavo, isolated in his cell, hated by his colleagues in the profession and with his career ruined, faced the harsh reality of a heavy sentence and the impossibility of ever practicing medicine again. Arthur didn't follow the case closely. He knew the justice system was taking its course, and that was enough for him. But one Saturday afternoon, something happened that he hadn't expected. While he was on the balcony of his apartment, watching the sky, now blue, Gabriela appeared again, this time with a backpack on her back. "I'm going to spend the weekend here if you don't mind," she said with a light smile. Arthur looked at her, unsure of what to say, but finally responded with a subtle smile. "I'll bring the coffee. You wash the dishes. Deal?" She laughed and, with a warm look, replied, "Deal. A deal." That night, they watched a movie on the couch with the volume low under a light blanket. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't require words, where each person knows their place. Before going to sleep, Arthur said something that Gabriela hadn't expected to hear. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She smiled, simply, without haste. "I just did what anyone who truly cares would do." Arthur remained silent for a moment, staring at the ceiling, taking a deep breath. "I hope the world still has more people like that." Gabriela, her eyes almost closing, whispered softly, "It does. You just have to start trusting again." And for the first time since the accident, Arthur thought that maybe she was right. 3 months later, Arthur's life seemed to finally be on track. It wasn't the life he had before, but it was a different life, smaller, quieter, but lighter. The company was stable, and things were running smoothly. Clara and the others were still waiting for their trials, but he was at peace with it. Gabriela, now a part of his everyday life, was present for breakfast, light walks in the late afternoon, and shared silences that didn't need to be broken. Arthur, despite the internal scars, had relearned how to breathe. He thought he had seen it all, that nothing else could surprise him, that all the pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. But he was wrong. It was on a Wednesday morning that Alvaro called, with a serious tone. "I need to meet with you in person." Arturo was taken aback by the urgency. "Did something happen?" "Yes, something happened, and it's big." 2 hours later, they were both sitting in the conference room, Arturo on one side of the table, Alvaro on the other. In the center, a thick brown envelope. Arturo looked at it, suspicious. "What's this?" "It's something that came up in a separate investigation, and it involves everything you've been through, even what happened before the accident." Arturo frowned. "Seriously? Tell me." Alvaro opened the envelope and took out some papers. Copies of old documents, black and white photos, medical reports, and letters dated from the 1990s. Vinicius's full name is Vinicius Duarte Pinto. You knew that, but what we didn't know is that his last name, Pinto, comes from his mother, Vera Duarte. Arthur nodded, confused. "Yes, Gustavo never denied it. She's Vinicius's mother, yes, but there's something he's always hidden. Vera was admitted to a psychiatric clinic in the 1990s for more than 5 years. Arthur leaned forward in his chair, trying to comprehend. Why was she admitted? Psychotic break with paranoid traits. And do you know what was at the center of everything she said? Arthur frowned, sensing that something was wrong. Me? What do you mean? Alvaro, with a serious expression, continued. Vera said you had stolen her future, that you were responsible for everything bad in her life. She said you had promised something to her and then pretended she didn't exist. Arthur froze, staring at Alvaro. That doesn't make sense. I never even got involved with that woman. But she said you did. She insisted on it. She was obsessed with you. In college, she worked as a lab assistant in her last year. There are no records of contact between you two, but she kept photos and notes, which she herself wrote, pretending they were from you. Arthur put his hand to his mouth, shocked. My God, Alvaro continued, knowing this would be another hard blow for Arthur. When she left the clinic, she went to her brother's care. A year later, she got pregnant by Gustavo. And at that moment, everything Arthur thought he knew about the past and the truth began to crumble. Arthur stood still, silent, absorbing everything he had just heard. With each word, another layer of reality unfolded before him, heavier than he had imagined. He and Vinicius had grown up together, almost like brothers, but everything he knew about his family's past, about their story, was completely distorted. Gustavo, the man he had always considered an ally, had never told him the truth. He had never mentioned Vinicius's mother, Vera, and her institutionalization. He had never mentioned how that woman had marked their destinies with her obsession. Arthur stood up, unsure of where to go. He began pacing the room, trying to organize the thoughts that seemed to no longer fit. So, all of this anger from Gustavo, this plan he made, this revenge, it all started back then, Arthur asked, almost breathless. It started with her obsession, right? She planted this in him, fed him this idea that I was responsible for her pain, for her ruined life. Alvaro remained silent, but made an affirmative gesture. Yes, she put that idea in his head, that you were the one to blame, that you had ruined everything. And when Vinicius grew up, he only knew that, but he didn't know why. He grew up with this anger toward you without really understanding. Arthur slowly turned, his eyes moist, as if he was trying to digest everything all at once. And he passed this on to his son. He fueled Vinicius's hatred. Alvaro nodded. Vinicius grew up believing you were the enemy, even without knowing the real reason. When he had the chance to infiltrate your life, he didn't hesitate. Arthur sat down again, this time more forcefully, as if his body could no longer support the weight of the revelation. I spent months thinking that all of this was about betrayal, about a plan, about revenge, but it wasn't just that. It was something much bigger, something that started long before I realized I was in this story. Alvaro then handed over the last sheet from the envelope, a handwritten letter never sent. Arthur took the paper, his fingers trembling, and read silently. The letter was from Vera, Vinicius's mother, an apology. She apologized to her son, saying she deeply regretted spreading so much hatred, feeding a lie, and making Arthur the target of her frustration. She admitted that Arthur hadn't done anything wrong, that it was all in her head. But, as she herself said, it was too late. Arthur folded the letter with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the words that couldn't undo the damage caused. They built an entire war based on a lie, he said, his voice low, filled with pain. At that moment, Gabriela entered the room. She didn't know what it was about, but immediately noticed something was wrong when she saw Arthur's face, so burdened. She stopped at the door and asked hesitantly, "Is everything okay?" Arthur looked at her with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. He looked at Alvaro and finally answered, "Now it is, because it's finally over." For the first time in months, he felt that all of it no longer defined him. The story that had destroyed his life wasn't really about him. It was an old lie, a groundless grievance, a resentment passed down from generation to generation. But knowing the truth, Arthur had finally freed himself. He was Arthur, and now he was free. Did you like today's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and share with your friends. We'll see you in the next video.